Huh? Yeah, no, it's not you. I think somebody let the battery die while it was updating. خير. Let us update. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. So last time we had started talking about, or we had gotten through the discussion of riyā and the effect that it has on our deeds. And there are situations where it's okay for us to do actions publicly, which was a big part of the discussion that we had last time. So what were those situations? When is it okay for me to publicize, quote unquote, my deeds? All right, if an individual is a public figure, so status is something that was very important. And what? And why is that? Why is if a person is well known, if a person is a public figure versus somebody who's not, why is it okay for him to publicize those deeds, and why is it not okay for others?
To lead.
All right, well, let's take it in a smaller context. Why is it okay for a father to do certain deeds or a mother to do certain deeds in front of their children, but they might not do those deeds in public?
The father and mother to show an example.
Okay.
For their kids.
Okay, so educational purposes. Okay, good.
Number one, and then number two, the father and mother want to see their kids succeed, and they're not going to have a riyā.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So in the situation of family, because like he had mentioned two situations, right? Like how close that person is to you.
There's three stages. Neighbors.
Yeah. So family, neighbors, and like the people in the marketplace. And he said that the closer a person is to you, the more you can. So someone in my family, I am not going to treat like my neighbors, who I'm not going to treat like strangers who I see in the street. And he's saying the likelihood of riyā, what happens? So as we go from family to neighbors to strangers, the likelihood of riyā, what? It increases or decreases?
Closer to the family, it decreases.
Decreases, right? So the closer we are to family, it decreases. Why? Because I'm going to be most sincere toward my family. Because the reason I'm doing that action is usually to what?
Education.
It's usually to teach or to encourage. Which is why, what is this, man? What is going on? The reason is usually to encourage or to teach. So if a person gives publicly, and there are many times like we go to fundraisers, and there's a chance when a person says, okay, I'll give 10,000, or I'll give 20,000, or I'll give $100. In those situations, we give because what do we want? And what are we looking for?
So others to follow, encourage others.
Right, we're looking to encourage others, and that's something that's really important. Is it possible that a person will fall into riyā in those situations?
Yes.
Yes, it is. So we have to be extra careful. Sometimes there are situations where it's easier. Sometimes there are situations where it's more challenging and more difficult. But it's important that we know ourselves and when to be public about things and when to be private. If I'm not sure on whether this will have an effect on my intention, what should I do?
Keep it private.
Keep it private. It's always important to lean toward privacy. Like being private is always going to be safer. I don't remember if we finished the chapter. I know it's been 2 weeks, I'm sorry. I know we got toward the end. This I remember, I think we discussed. This narration. We did? So over here, we did. So over here, what's interesting is that he's not talking about showing off actions, he's actually talking about what? What's the story here? What's going on?
So I think this one was in reference to people leaving things.
Right? Leaving things. So it's not just doing actions, it's also leaving actions. And this is something that's important for us to keep in mind. Just because we have to watch our intention, not only when it comes to performing deeds, but also leaving them. We want to do things for Allah, but we also want to leave things for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It should never be the other way around. And this is basically an overcorrection in protecting ourselves from riyā. And there's extremism in that too. There's extremism in everything. And it's important to remember and not fall into extremism when it comes to leaving off certain things. Oh, I don't want to pray my sunnah because I'm worried about what so-and-so will say. So what am I not going to do? I'm not going to pray my sunnah. And this very much comes in line with, and like we were discussing this in the hadith class also, about sometimes like we stay away from certain things or we do certain things because what the culture demands from us, from sometimes what superiors demand from us, sometimes what family demands from us. And it's important to understand that just because I'm being asked or demanded this, I can do what? I can choose not to do it, right? I can challenge that. And is it easy? No, right? It's difficult. It's not easy to do that, especially when we have all of this pressure. I remember I was teaching a bunch of police officers when I was in Saudi, and these are all high-ranking people. And part of their training was like they had to learn English, so I was teaching them English. And I was like, well, what are some of the big problems and issues that you guys face? Because I was trying to get them to speak, and they were like, you know, when we got married, we had to pay like all this mahar, like we had to pay a lot of money, and this and that. I was like, okay. And like I was in there, like, you know, there's just a lot of expectations from the family and this and that. And I said to them, I was like, well, I don't really think that was your test. And they were all like, well, what do you mean? I said, you guys all paid, right? You're all married. And they're like, yeah. I was like, it was tough, right? And they're like, yeah. I was like, what is your test then? They said what? I was like, when your daughters get married, what are you gonna do? I was like, are you going to accept that your daughter is going to get less mahar than you gave your wife? Or I said, because there are a few problems. Number one, there's pressure from the family. The other one is sometimes trauma is passed down like through generations. It's like, yeah, exactly. If I had to pay $50,000, then I'm going to make the next guy, if not more, right? So these are things that are important for us to keep in mind. Sometimes we forget, you know, and all of us we're products of our environment, we're products of our upbringing, we're products of our interaction, we're products of the trauma that we like. A lot of us have faced different types of adversity in our lives. Some of us might have gotten to a point where, like, you know, we didn't know how we were going to pay our bills. We didn't know how we were going to move forward. We didn't know what kind of difficulties we were going to face, like the situations that we're in. Sometimes they're just like, we feel so pressured, right? But eventually we come out of it. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, sometimes things are challenging. But the fact that we're able to move through those, okay, well, how do I process that? How do I deal with that? The fact that, you know, I had a car that when I was in Mecca, I made dua every time I started it. Like, how do I deal with that now? It's like, do I have trauma every time I get into a car? Or do I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gave me a car that starts every time? Have I become more appreciative? If I had a friend who was like really toxic and I broke off that friendship, does it help me appreciate the friends who are actually, you know, who are motivating? Does it help me appreciate those friends who are actually encouraging? Or do I start looking at all people as they're negative and be very doubtful in every single relationship that I have? Right? And it's amazing in Islam how, regardless of what the situation is, it's like, okay, you know what? I fell into that. I made this mistake. I shouldn't have done this. All right, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to move forward? It's amazing how Islam is a very forward-thinking religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says about those people who believe, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, that they're not worried about their past mistakes. Because He uses the word khawf, He doesn't say لَا يَخَافُونَ, right? He doesn't say the verb. He says that they have no fear. Nor are they sad. Meaning that regardless of the decisions that they make, they're not upset. And they're not worried about what happened in the past. Does it mean that we should forget everything that happened to us? Absolutely not. Like we're not fools. Like we're human beings, and what is it saying? Like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, or something like that, right? No. We have to learn from our situations. We have to learn from our mistakes, and then so that we can become better, right? The goal of the Muslim is Jannah, right? That's our individual goal. That I want to get to paradise, and in the path to paradise, it can only happen when I'm growing, and I'm moving toward it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was shown paradise, right? He was shown paradise, and Jibreel alayhi salam, he was shown paradise, and he said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was like, with all of these difficulties that are around it, I can't imagine anyone getting there, right? I can't imagine anyone making it. So to travel a difficult path, can I just be unprepared and start walking and start taking that path? No, man, I have to get ready. I have to prepare myself. And our preparation in this world are the challenges and difficulties and obstacles that we make, and that we have. Even the greatest messengers and the greatest prophets, who were they? They're the ones that face the greatest difficulty. They're the ones that face the greatest hardships. But yeah, subhanAllah. So here, concealing sin. This is another very important topic and an important discussion that sometimes can be associated with riya. But concealing sin can lead to riya, depending on the reasons that we're doing it. And the reason being that sometimes we do it for the wrong reasons. Should we conceal our sins in general? Yes, absolutely. But we have to do it for the right reasons. Here, Imam Ghazāli, he says that the essence of sincerity lies in the balance between secrecy and openness. Interestingly enough here, Umar, radiallahu anh, he said to a man, adhere to openness and be open. Be transparent. The man said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, what do you mean by open and transparent? Umar replied, it is when you do something, you do not feel ashamed if people see it. Meaning that I should always be trying to do what? Be honest. All right, not just being honest is part of a larger category of just doing good things. And if it's something that I'm not ashamed to do in public, then it makes it that much easier, and that should help me judge my actions. It should help me judge the decisions that I'm making. Right? If I have no problem driving to a certain place, but all of a sudden I feel shy driving somewhere else, or speaking to someone who I shouldn't be speaking to, or texting someone who I shouldn't be texting, or going to a place I shouldn't be going to, and my heart is telling me, hey, listen, this is probably not a good idea. Right? Then I probably shouldn't do it. Right? What is the safe thing to do? The safe thing is not to do it. Because I don't want to be ashamed of what I did later. And this is part of this idea of openness and transparency, and that we make decisions that we should be proud of our decisions. That's basically what this means here, is that we should be proud of the decisions that we make. Does it mean that we're always going to make positive decisions? No. Like we're all human. Like we all have shortcomings. We all make mistakes. We all blunder, right? Like this is how we are. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us. But the mindset that we should have is always to be positive and always do those things that, make those decisions that we're proud of. Abu Muslim al-Khawlani, he said, I do not mind if people see any of my actions except when it comes to my intimacy, relieving myself, or performing bodily functions. So these things, he's like, no, these things I want to keep private because they are meant to be private. But he says everything else, he's like, I'm an open book. Know what you have to know. And this is important for us as Muslims, and it shows the importance of honesty. It shows the importance of openness, and shows the importance of being truthful. Because essentially, even when we look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we can talk about all of his characteristics, right? We can talk about him being generous, we can talk about him being kind, but what are usually the first two that come to mind when we talk about him sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Or what come to your guys' mind when we talk about him sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Like character, or like special unique things that he's done.
Sure, there's a lot of unique things that he's done, but I'm saying like when we talk about characteristics and how to describe him, you'll find many people say he's sadiq and ameen. Yes? Right. Like from his khuluq is that he was sadiq and ameen, right? That he was honest and he was trustworthy. And to me, this is always something that's been amazing, because it's like, okay, well, out of all the characteristics, why are these two that always, like they always make it to the top of the list? And I sat and I thought about it, and I realized, like, man, like society is built off these things, right? Society is not built off of kindness. It's not built off of generosity. Like those things are good, right? They're great and we should have them. But if I don't trust other people, how am I going to buy things? How am I going to interact? How am I going to talk to people? How am I going to make friendships? And if I'm not trustworthy, then I'm always going to have that doubt when I go to purchase something or when I get a service done. Right? You just become this suspicious person. You'll never be at peace. Like you're constantly being suspicious of the people around you. And this is something that we should think about and look at in ourselves. Like we're not naive, right? Like we shouldn't be naive either. That's not the goal at all. But we should always be willing to give people opportunities and give people chances. Why? Because we would hope the same for ourselves. Like we want people to give us a chance. We want to give people the opportunity to trust us. Because that's how we build relationships. Like relationships are built off of honesty and trustworthiness. And it's amazing. How do I be honest? Just be open. Be transparent. Don't hide things. And if I'm hiding something, huh? Well, faults we should hide, right? Unless there are certain faults that we shouldn't, and that's in the situation of when I'm getting married, right? So if there's something, for example, if I don't have the ability to have children, for example, that's something I should share with the potential spouse, right? Because that's something that can affect the marriage. If there's something that can affect the relationship directly, it depends. If I backbit someone, right? If I spoke about a friend, is it always a good idea to tell them? Yeah, not always, right? Because it's not always a healthy way. They might not respond in a healthy way. Huh? It might backfire. It's like, hey, listen, man, I said this. It was like, well, I never want to be friends with you again. And like, you know what I mean? Like, and it could just end up being something that's really bad. If there are things that directly affect the relationship, yeah, that's something that's important. And it has to be shared. Because what happens if somebody else tells that person? Right? I'm friends with someone. I borrowed their car and I got into an accident and I returned the car. Said nothing. This has happened, right? Like, this is something that happens. And I returned the car. He comes out of his house the next morning, and he's like, dude, who hit my car? What happened? And blah, blah, blah. He's like, he calls me up. He's like, man, can you believe what happened? Like, somebody hit my car. I'd be like, yeah, that sucks. That's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that. And then later, somebody's like, what? Wait, what? When did you say your car got hit? Yeah, I saw him driving your car that same night. What do you think is going to happen? Right? I'm saying when he finds out, how's that going to affect the relationship? And it's just the relationship's going to break. Versus had someone come forward and be like, hey, listen, I'm sorry, I borrowed your car and I got into an accident, my bad. And sometimes they can be salvaged, right? Because that person's coming forward. So it's situational, right?
My question actually is about, in terms of doubting people, we can always take things face value, right?
Sure.
But it's funny because I feel like I don't do that. I'm mostly hanging on to like how I sense people's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I think it's just too hard for me. What I'm trying to say is like, what if you have someone saying something face value, but it's hard to trust them because you can sense their energy is different?
Sure, but how can you trust that sense?
Oh, interesting. Why? I think it might not be. It's still.
It might not be true. Like, there are feelings that we have about people, right? All the time. There might be someone who's like, yeah, this guy, he does not seem, and he turns out to be like the most honest guy ever.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes our feelings betray us. So it's important to not trust our feelings and trust our experiences, right? Because those are factual. Feelings sometimes they're totally unbased. Is it possible that someone attends a funeral and they're giddy? Happens, right? Is it appropriate? No, but feelings aren't rational, and it's not. We shouldn't invest too much into feelings. Like, feelings are important. Like, don't get me wrong. They're more like guides and gauges, but if I drove my car and I only looked at the oil temperature gauge, right? I'm not looking at the speedometer. I'm not looking at anything else. I'm only looking at this. How long do you think that car is going to last? Right? Or if I'm only looking at the speedometer, or I'm only looking at the, like, you know what I mean? Like, we have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these set of gauges to help us understand how to navigate our relationships. None of them are wrong, right? I'm never going to say like, oh, it's wrong to be angry, or it's wrong to be giddy, or it's wrong to be sad. No, those things are fine, right? They're very natural emotions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and blessed us with. But they're just gauges. They're just feelers. I should do my best not to express them in a haram way. And one possible, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Inna ba'd al-dhann ithm. He says some types of suspicion is actually sinful. Right? Some suspicion is fine. Like sometimes if I have suspicion and it's like founded, man, he smells like pot. I see him hanging out in places where I know people sell it. The friends are like really bad. Is that suspicion founded that hey, listen, there's like a 90% chance that he probably does marijuana?
It's like you wake up in the morning and you see there's tracks.
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Animal pass.
Right. I'm saying if I have clear clues,
yeah,
if I have clear clues, I have every route to have the suspicion in that situation. Okay, what if I see nothing and I'm like, you know what? I think he does pot.
No,
That's unfounded, right? And our feelings many times are based off of these unfounded suspicions. Yes.
But I kind of understand her. Like sometimes, like we're always taught to trust our feelings, and that's what increases your intuition. And I feel like sometimes, like I do let it pass, and I just watch the situation, and I'm like, no, it's just my mind, it's just my mind, it's just my mind, and then it turns out to be true.
Sure.
And I'm like, why didn't I trust myself the first time?
So.
And then I go
Yeah.
back to that, and I'm like, I should have just trusted my feelings. And I think it's mainly a woman.
It's
I
a
know, like,
one thing.
like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that men don't have like strong intuition.
Yeah.
But I feel like women really have this.
I don't have
Really hard.
I don't have a problem with intuition,
Yeah.
because intuition will help give insight, but it's not fair to rely on it alone. A lot of times what happens is that we'll have the intuition plus red flags, and we'll ignore those red flags. And instead of looking back and being like, man, I should have trusted my intuition. No, you should have trusted yourself when you saw those red flags, right? That's a lot of times that's what happens. Are there situations it's like we make a bad decision? It's like, man, I should have trusted my intuition. Absolutely. Like I definitely agree. Is there an element of like ilham that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does He sometimes like give us insight into certain situations? Like sometimes we'll be driving and like, and it's a path that I take every single day, and Allah will be like, don't take this path, right? Like I'll just feel it. I'll just like, man, no, I don't want to drive. You know what? I'm going to take the long way home, and you'll go that way. You find out later, like, hey, there was a robbing, there was an accident, whatever the case might be. Those are totally fine. I'm okay with that. The problem is when it comes to dealing with other people, there's so many more layers that are involved there, and I might dismiss and hurt someone just because of a feeling.
Do you think it's wise to, especially if you have communication skills, like you're assuming something, right? You're following your feelings. Is it wise to always bring it up to the other person?
The feeling? No,
No.
not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Sometimes you just let it go and you realize, oh,
Yeah.
it wasn't anything.
No. Like I said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us feelings as gauges, not as points to act on every single moment, right? If every time I'm angry, if I act on it, do you think it's going to be healthy for the people around me? Or every time I'm happy, like, you know what I mean? Like I start giving away no, it's not. These aren't healthy ways to interact and deal with other people. Having those feelings is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And like I said, even with intuition, sometimes it's 100% right. Like from the beginning. From the beginning, it's like, man, I really have a bad feeling about this person, but his track record is clean. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing to back, there's no facts to back my intuition. So what do? I'll give him a chance, but instead of letting him borrow $100, I might let him borrow 10, right? A couple weeks go by, he's like, bro, I don't have the money. He starts coming up with excuses or whatever the case might be, even though he promised he would be, okay. I gave him a chance, but I also didn't lose a lot. So I think that, I think the intuition can help with the level of caution when it comes to engagement, but I don't think it should be the sole reason to completely remove.
Tell them that, like, oh, you're taking my money, you know what I'm saying?
No. Well, I mean, if you want to be mean. Yeah,
There's a way to say it, to say your concern.
yeah, of course. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with being honest. It's like, hey, listen, you know, can I borrow $100? I was like, listen, I don't really know you. It's like, oh no, you know, but we've been praying together. And blah, blah. I was like, yeah, but I've never done business with you before. And for some people it's hurtful, or they might present it as if they're hurt. But there's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because I'm being I'm being honest. SubhanAllah, I remember I actually had a bad feeling about this one guy. And he was coming to the masjid and he was like getting people to like, he wanted them to invest in something and this and that. And I was like, I don't know about this, man. Like it sounds kind of fishy. I was like, hey, can you show me like, you know, some of the stuff that you're doing or what you're invested in? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe. So I started asking other people. And other people started confirming like, no, man, it's shady and blah, blah, blah. He actually took a lot of money from the people in the community and he left the community. It turns out he was going from community to community, like taking advantage of people. So does intuition sometimes, does it help? Yeah, I definitely feel like sometimes it does. But we shouldn't use that to prohibit us from, because the problem is if we rely on it every time, we will actually prohibit ourselves from interacting with a large group of people. Sometimes our intuition, it can be off because of our own feelings, right? So sometimes like we're angry and that'll kind of overcome and it'll cloud what that intuition is in the moment. There are some people who like I really disliked and they ended up becoming my best friends. You know, it happens. So we shouldn't always trust our feelings, but there's yeah, just be cautious.
Be cautious.
Yeah.
And go from there, yes.
I'm saying, listen, the Muslim is not naive, right? The Muslim is not naive. The Muslim should always learn from their experience. There's a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sometimes like we don't appreciate it in the moment, but there's a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes us to certain things, right? There's a reason that Allah caused my car to break down in the highway, right? It happened, right?
There's a reason why maybe you have your perceived reality, like maybe Allah has, I don't know, do you know what I'm saying? Like everyone has
Sure.
a particular way of seeing the world.
And that's fine, right? I have no issue. Like we're all going to be jaded and skewed and biased in our own ways because we all were raised differently. We've all had different experiences, and that's fine. I personally don't have a problem with that. I would say like it's very similar. Like even Islamically, religiously, you have people who are more religiously liberal, people who are more religiously conservative. I'm fine with that. Like it doesn't bother me. Why? Because you need to have those differences also to appreciate each other. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He gave us these differences, لِتَعَرَفُوا, so that we can know and recognize each other. Imagine if everybody liked the same food. Right? It'd be pretty boring. If everybody had the same temperament. What would we talk about if we didn't differ? Like if everybody just, everybody agreed even before anybody spoke. Like it wouldn't be like a very interesting world. And not just that, I think brotherhood and sisterhood, it really shows when we differ. That's when it really shows. When we agree, it's easy. Like if we can all agree on a cheese pizza, what's the challenge? Okay, but what if he likes a certain topping? What if you guys like certain toppings? Now actually coming to an agreement, like, okay, you know what, now we have to actually work on it, and that's where brotherhood is going to show. There's some brothers and sisters we just don't like, right? Like we have a problem with them, like we don't get along with them. But at the end of the day, I know that this is my brother and sister, and I have to do my best to protect them, even if I don't really care for them. And that's reality. But honesty, openness, this is how society is built. This is how the Muslim should be. Like we should always work our best to be honest, to be open, to be proud of the things that we do and proud of our actions. Are there some actions that we're not proud of? Absolutely, man. Like we all have shortcomings. We just keep striving to be better and make istighfar and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. So, sin can be motivated by desires, they can be motivated by aspirations, and it's important to remember that our intention for hiding that sin should be sincere for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And if I'm doing that, then this is not riyā, right? This is not showing off. The fact that I want to hide my sin, regardless of what the intention is, regardless of what my motivations are, then that is not actually riyā, it's not actually showing off. It only becomes riyā when I'm sinning, right? I'm sinning, but I still try to give the appearance of being pious. Because now I'm actually putting on a front, right? This is a false display. This is where it becomes a problem. Yeah.
How does that translate to sisters wearing hijab? So is that considered like riyā if you wear the hijab but you're not practicing?
Not necessarily. Some women do it for cultural reasons, right? They're just raised to wear hijab, so they do it. There are women in my family, when we have family gatherings, they won't wear a hijab the moment they step out the door. Like in family gatherings like these are not everybody's mahram. And even in some of those gatherings, like I remember their cousins who actually they actually ended up getting married. So it's not like, oh, we don't know who's eligible, who's not eligible, or we don't know no, everybody's pretty aware. But for cultural reasons, they wear it.
But hijab is part of ibadah, right?
Yeah.
And then you said appearance of piety, so hijab might be considered appearance of piety?
It depends on the intention of the individual.
But in general, not the intention.
I can't, so we can't do that, right? I might perceive it as an outsider, right? As a third party, I might have that perception. But does my perception affect your intention?
No.
No. Right? Remember, all of this discussion of tazkiyah, it's a very personal discussion. These are all very personal things. And whether it be hijab, or whether it be salah, or whether it be zakah, or hajj, or whether it be any action, like any ibadah, reading Quran, all of those can be considered, riyah can insert itself into those actions, correct?
Yeah.
So just like that, it can insert itself into wearing hijab.
So this is from first person perspective, not like second person?
No.
Okay.
No. So the problem is that sometimes this creates a certain perception in certain people. It's like, oh, I know hijabis. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that you guys have heard this before, like, oh, I know hijabi girls. And they're not all like religious and this and that. Blah, blah. Okay, that's your perception. I don't know who you've been interacting with, but that's your perception. It's not fair, like, because we don't paint everybody with the same stroke. I don't think that's fair at all. Or like all people are like this, or all people are like that. Okay, maybe some. Like I don't doubt it. Is every man who comes to the masjid for 5 prayers pious? No. Is every woman who wears hijab pious? No. Right? Those are actions. Those are just actions. People might do them for different reasons. It might be because of family pressure. It might be because of culture. It might be for, it's like I need to keep up appearances. It might be because, well, I'm not going to get a job unless I appear pious. I'm not going to attain status until I appear pious. Right? It's very dangerous. So, like I said, it's a very personal thing. As for what people think, some people are just haters too, right? it's unfortunate. Like I know some women, and this is not all women, but there are some women who don't wear hijab and they hate on women who wear hijab. They're like, oh, well, hijab doesn't make them pious. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think even they claim that. Right? They wear hijab because they're supposed to. Has nothing to do with like, oh, I'm such a pious person or I'm not a pious person. Yeah, and some people are just angry. Like, I think some of it has to do with their own upbringing. Sometimes, even individuals. I remember there was this couple that was they were looking to get married, and the young woman was practicing and the man was not. And usually such marriages, I'm like, listen, it's probably better you guys don't get married. Not because anyone's better than the other, but if you're not on a similar spiritual wavelengths, it's usually not going to work, because one person is going to feel judged constantly and the other person is going to, you know what I mean? And the other person is going to feel obligated to kind of bring that person and pull that person along. So he actually had a problem with her religiosity. He was like, man, she's too religious and blah blah blah. And I was like, are you like listening to yourself? Like right now? It turns out his mother was like super religious. Like religious to the point of actually even being neglectful of the kids. Like so engrossed in her prayer, so engrossed in like reading Quran and blah blah blah. And the kids felt like she didn't really engage with them. So what was he actually afraid of? Right? He was afraid that, man, I'm going to marry someone who's going to ignore me. So he didn't have a problem with he associated religion with a person, instead of understanding like, okay, no, religion is far broader than this individual representation of it. So how we process trauma is very unique, right? Like the way we deal with adversity and the way we deal with our problems and issues, instead of saying like, okay, no, you know what? I'm going to find someone who's practicing but doesn't practice like that. I'm going to become better. You know what? I'm going to practice and I'm going to show my children the attention that they need and that they deserve. It's tough. And it's tough for us as humans sometimes to compartmentalize. It's easy to just kind of take a brush stroke, you know what I mean, and paint everyone. It's easy for our minds. Instead of treating everybody as individuals, that's actually tough. That's actually hard. Where we want to treat everyone's like, no, this person is not that person. Sometimes even within families. It's like, okay, no, the son is not the father. Right? Sometimes we'll be like, oh man, the father is like this. I'm sure the son is like that. Oh, that's not always the case. And that's not even fair. Or I was like, oh, these two people are friends. He's definitely got to be bad because this friend is like bad. But it's like, no, he turns out to be a great guy. It's tough, you know what I mean? It's like, it's tough for our brains.
Individual cases.
Right? To treat everybody as individuals. But subhanAllah, this is exactly how Allah wants us to treat each other. As individuals. He does this whole, like, there's no difference between any of you. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter what you speak. It doesn't matter how tall or short or thin or wide. It doesn't matter. Like, none of these things are important. How are you treating each other? How are you dealing with each other? And the only pathway that actually leads to being just, and the only pathway that leads to treating people as individuals is having that pathway of taqwa, of actually having taqwa of Allah after actually remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if I have a good, meaningful relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where is that going to reflect? In my relationship with others. That's very important. If I'm pious, and I remember Allah, and I'm upright, what would ever give me the right to treat anybody else poorly? What would give me the right to look down on someone? What would give me the right to lie to someone, or to take advantage of others, or to hurt others? Because we remember who we are, and we realize, man, like I'm nothing. I need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, Allah is not in need of me. And it puts me in my place. It keeps me humble. It keeps me modest. Like humility, modesty, these are characteristics that we should be striving for. These are characteristics that we should be working for. Because these will only strengthen and embolden and better the relationships that we have. And if you look at a lot of the problems that we have in different relationships, whether it be with our parents or with our friends or our spouses or children, blah, 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 you know what a lot of it boils down to? Ego. A lot of it boils down to ego. Well, why didn't you just say this to her? Like, even your kids, like, okay, well, why didn't you just tell your son this? He should understand. Like, why? If you didn't explain it to him, why should he understand? She should know better. Why should she know better? Did you tell her? Did you tell her that it was something that you didn't like? Like and all of those things, they come from expectations, they come from this. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. The best of you is the one who is best to his wives, and I am best to my wives. And I'm like, well, shouldn't we be good with, when you look at this hadith, you're like, well, shouldn't you be good with everyone? Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about, he says, ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. He says that in between the spouses I have placed love and mercy. I was like, well, shouldn't there be love and mercy in all our relationships? Like, why is this focus on marriage? The Prophet ﷺ is talking about being good to your wife. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the relationship between a husband and a wife. It should be based in the lens of love and mercy. And then I realized, because that is the relationship that's easiest to take for granted. It's just it's someone you chose, right? I didn't choose my father, I didn't choose my siblings, I didn't choose my children, right? There's something that, that inherited and naturally come of certain relationships. But my wife, I actually chose. Like, I chose my wife. Like, there was a consensual agreement that we wanted to get married. And because of that, it becomes so easy to take advantage of and take for granted. Why? Because so many things get done that every day, the more things she does for you, what happens? Right? Your expectations start going more and 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 more. And then all of a sudden, when a couple things aren't getting done, what happens? You start getting frustrated. You start getting upset. But if we keep fighting that bar, and the only way to fight that bar is humility. That's the only way. Fighting the ego, that's the only way. But the more we fight our ego, the more enriching our relationships definitely can be. It's just tough. It really is hard. So if an individual doesn't want to show off, if he's not falling into riyā, then it's permissible for him to hide his sins. There are 8 things he needs to keep in mind. So here, they rejoice in Allah's covering of their sins. So because Allah didn't expose it, I should be what? If I lied, and nobody finds out about it, how should I feel? I should feel happy. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hid that sin. They know that Allah dislikes the manifestation of sins and prefers them to be concealed. So if there's a choice between public sin and private sin, Allah prefers the private sin. They detest people blaming them for their sins because it affects them and distracts them from obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want to distract myself when I'm worshiping, right? And if people are constantly putting me down, what's going to happen? I'm going to start focusing on what they're saying instead of actually focusing on the action. They dislike being praised or blamed by people. They detest being blamed by people because blame implies disobedience to Allah. If I am to be blameworthy, then it's because I disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They conceal their sins to avoid people's attention. They maintain modesty, which is a form of pain that accompanies blame. And we'll talk about modesty. His discussion of modesty is actually really good and really unique. I really liked it. And they exhibit shyness. So these are important characteristics to keep in mind when we talk about hiding sin. And inshallah, each one of these, we're going to get into more detail and we're going to discuss. But they're about to call adhan. But we'll stop here inshallah, because I don't want to get into too much into it, bi'idhnillah. But from next week, bi'idhnillah, we'll start getting into these one by one and go through them inshallah. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin, nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jazakumullah khair. I am not.